Hey everyone, I recently had the opportunity to run an introductory workshop to lighting in Unreal Engine for LTU, or Lawrence Technical University. This workshop was completely free for all participants and was funded by the Epic Mega Grants through LTU, and it was run fully remotely through Discord. This is a 4-part video series that captures the entire workshop. Each video or module will cover a different aspect of lighting in Unreal Engine. Module 1 is an overview of the Unreal Engine UI. Module 2 covers the lighting workflow for exteriors. Module 3 covers lighting interiors. And Module 4 covers light baking with Lightmass and post-processing settings. If you found this video helpful, let me know in the comments below and I'll be happy to share more Unreal Engine content on my YouTube channel. So with that, enjoy. Alright, so go ahead and start recording again. So, before we jump into the next module, and hopefully, with the 30 minutes we had before and the break, did anybody have any questions on anything before we move on to lighting the interior? Okay. Doesn't sound like it, so we'll just keep going. Okay, so where we're at right now, if we take a look, remember, we disabled all of the post-processing, and all we're seeing right now in the viewport is the reflections that we've created and the lighting that we have created. All right, so you want to make sure to disable those post-processing settings so you can see the true lighting and true reflections in your scene. All right, so if we go ahead now and look at the interior, there's no auto exposure, so everything's super dark, which is what we would expect. So the first thing we want to do is let's just go ahead and create some more lights. And the lights that we want to create, you can actually go to the place actors here, go to lights, and we want to begin probably with just a good old point light. And if I go ahead and just jump to unlit mode, just so you can see what we're working with, we have this kind of lamp here in the center, and we have one in the corner here, and then we have 3 kind of recessed lights there, and then we have a lamp behind us here. And in this hallway, there's just kind of a little light here as well. So those are the core main lights that we'll be working with. I don't think I'm going to give light to every single one, but we'll definitely do most of them. So I'll go ahead and grab point light and drag that right into the center. Okay, and we see a couple things happen immediately, right? Because we've already baked the lighting. Unreal Engine's like, hey, this new light, 71 objects are unbuilt, right? It's just telling us that nothing or these objects on the interior, or that's being affected by this point light, need to have baked lighting. We could, of course, set this to a straight movable light, and it's fully real time. And this is, basically what we'd see here. But because we have the main directional light as our stationary light, we're not trying to go too intense here resource-wise. So we want to keep this to be, I'm going to leave this as a static light, right? Especially since we're getting a lot of light coming directly from this window here. So, it's also snapping, grid snapping, so I can turn off grid snapping here so I can get a little bit more precise. Now, one thing that's pretty nice is actually if you hold V and grab the middle piece, see how you can now snap to any vertex in the editor? So you can basically get pretty close to snapping this right on the center of the light bulb here. I think this is good enough. All right. So I've set the mobility to static. So this light, as of right now, is going to be purely baked. All right. And with this in position and it's set to static, being baked, we can go ahead now and set some light properties, okay? Now I'm going to expand the light settings here, so show advanced, and you'll see that there are intensity units, okay? If you remember that our lighting here had, for our directional light, lux, okay? And the spotlight here, and what I'm going to do is actually clean this up a little bit because it's starting to get a little bit messy. So what I'm going to do is grab all my reflections and drop that into a new group and call it reflections. And all I did was just select those objects and hit create new folder, and it'll automatically put all the selected objects in there. And then we can grab point light and put it in our lighting group. Now, I do want to set and kind of differentiate here. So I'm gonna just maybe have, you can call it main or exterior lighting, whatever you want to call it. And then we're gonna have a group of lights here that'll be on the interior. Okay. So we have the point light in here, and we can see that the intensity units here are candelas. All right. Now the way using candelas is perfectly fine. It's pretty simple. One candela is one candle, as far as to help visualize the intensity of that light. So basically this is saying that this is 8 candelas, so it's about 8 candles worth of intensity. All right. I personally, and you can work with that completely fine, I professionally work with lumens. So you'll see that this is 100 lumens here. So it's a little bit different, about, you know, close to 10 times the amount. But I will go ahead and set this to maybe, you know, 10 lumens for the interior. So you just kind of get this nice soft interior lamp lighting. I don't want anything too intense, but you can also set this to be, you know, not whatever you want. Keep in mind, we're going to balance some things. Okay, so lumens, or if you go to unit lists are fine. You're just kind of working with a different set of values. So about 500 is where you want to be. So we'll keep it at lumens, or I'll put it at lumens, put it at 10, and I will keep this static. And again, you'll see now, it might be a little bit dark. What I'll actually do is, now that we're working on the interior, is bring up the exposure just a bit. Now, when I say bring up the exposure, I mean lower the exposure value. So what that does is letting more light, so it's bringing up the dark EV values here so we can see them. Okay, so -2 is what I'm using. Just keep in mind, because we don't have auto exposure, if we go outside, things are going to look a lot brighter. And we're going to balance that again at the end when we do some post-processing. Okay, so we have this, and the other important setting is attenuation radius. So you'll see that this is has an attenuation radius of about 1,000 units. So if you wanted to bring that in a little bit tighter, you certainly can. But just keep in mind, obviously the intensity of the sun is going to overtake anything from that on the outside. So it's not really going to affect anything on the outside. But you can maybe set it to like 500 if you want. So it'll affect kind of everything in this area. I would at least make sure it hits this wall. So I'll set it to 750. Okay. You have other settings in here like source radius that you can, change the actual, like this is now, it's gone from 0, which is essentially a single point in 3D space. And you can actually make this quite large and have it emit like, maybe a larger light bulb or something like that. But we're going to stick with this just being 0 here, or the default value. Yeah, that should be fine. And what I want to take a look at is temperature. Okay, now remember what I said at the beginning. At the beginning I said I want cool lighting on the exterior and warm lighting on the interior. So with that, I can go ahead now and enable temperature and go and increase this temperature, it's like temperature as far as kelvins go. So if I want warmer lighting, I go closer to 0. So I could do something like 4,800 Kelvin, and now you get this nice warmth. If I want to exaggerate that even more, we can type in a value of 4,500 Kelvin. I always say, just go online and take a look, right? I mean, I have some light bulbs here that I can look at that let me know that, they're soft white, how many watts, how many lumens, the temperature. So, if you go to even like Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that, you'll be able to see all those values, right? So you can see 3 primary types of color temperature for light bulbs. I just said the one above me is a soft white, so that's 27 Kelvin to 3000. Bright white, cool white is 35 to 41, and daylight's 5000 to 65. So you kind of play within those ranges there, which is going to help you kind of get better lighting, or lighting that better control over your lighting. Okay, so we got that, effects world, cast shadow, everything else is pretty good as is. We're not going to change too many settings, disable anything in these advanced settings to kind of keep us moving, but I think that's fine. Okay, and what we want to do now is we can take this light, we have this as the point light, and we want to put it on this lamp in the corner. So if you're happy with these settings, you can grab this light and hit Control W. So Control W will duplicate that in place, and now I can move that in position and put this in the corner lamp here. So now I can go ahead and kind of zoom in and zoom out a little bit and just kind of get this in position. Now we have to, if I want to snap it to this light bulb, I have to get in pretty close, but I just need to, yeah, we'll get pretty close there. So you can see if I'm not exactly precise, I'll hold V, snap. It's like once it gets past that, all right, there we go. Once it gets past it, it's like gone, or past the wall. But this is good enough. And I can position this as I need it, or as I see fit. And this, yeah, this is good. And I can, you know, push it up, push it down, whatever. But this is good. Now keep in mind, things look a little harsh right now. It's just like the directional light. Things are going to look really harsh and intense until we bake the lighting. That's where the preview lighting is going to help. All right. So if I go ahead right now, I'm trying to think. Yeah, let me go ahead and, let me make the last point light here. So the last point light that I want to make is going to go into this hallway here. All right. So I'm going to hit Control W again to duplicate that in place and put that in this hallway. Now I'm going to just jump to my front view here. And that was the wrong side. Left view. Trying to see where it is. You know what? Top view is probably for the best. So I'll go ahead and switch to my top view, and there's my light bulb. There. So I'm just finding that light bulb that's in the center here. So I'll just roughly position that there. Okay. So I can jump back to perspective, hit F, and just move this up in the Z. All right. Now, from a creative standpoint, this is fine. We can leave it warm. But let's say this is a game level and I want the user to walk down this hallway. I maybe want to change this light to a different color to, you know, pull their attention. So instead of 45 temperature, maybe I'll do 6800. And then now it's cooler. And when we bake that, we want to get this nice cool interior. You're like, oh, cool. I wonder what's down in that hallway. And then you can head down over there. And then we can change the attenuation radius maybe to like 500. So it's basically right up until the end of this door. But you can play with those values. If you wanted to kind of bleed out into here, you certainly can. Okay. So these are all of our point lights. And these are the key settings that I'm going to mess with. And I'll go ahead now and we can do a preliminary bake. So remember, if we go to lighting quality, we're set to preview, and I can just do a build. Now, I'm not sure, you know, I think once you get Unreal open, bakes are fine. And it should bake in a couple of minutes. Okay. Did anybody experience anything longer than that after you changed the Lightmass settings here back to the default, right? Double check your world settings, make sure that they're not set really high and that this is set to preview. Did anybody have any really long bake times even using preview? I mean, it's going. Because what I was gonna suggest is if maybe it was taking a while to bake, I would delete the landscape. If you're on maybe a lower end machine, you literally just select, I'm not gonna do it now because I'm in the middle of baking. But if you select this landscape group and these two objects, you can outright just delete them. And that'll just speed things up a little bit. But again, basically by the time I'm done talking, it's done baking. So like I said, it should take a minute or two, maybe a little bit longer on your end, but we're just using preview. Like it's not that much. And there we go. So here's what we got. So you can see, yeah, it's just taking a second to load some maps here. Here's what we got, and we can see again, don't worry about this quality, okay? I mean, we're actually gonna talk a little bit about that right now. Is you see that it's kind of splotchy and a little bit noisy. That's a lot because of the preview, but it's also because we need to help Unreal Engine tell it where to focus its effort. Because if you take a look at the message log, it'll basically tell you right here, no importance volume found. The scene is so large that it automatically synthesized volume and will not yield, what is it saying? Good results. Yeah, so let's fix that. So let's go ahead now. If you go to the place actors and type in light or mass, yeah, Lightmass, and there's Lightmass importance volume. So I'm gonna drag this and drop this into my level here. And I'm gonna go ahead now and create it with some specific settings. Let me see what I ended up using. Yeah, so under the brush settings XYZ, you can set X to be 3500, Y to 4000, and Z to 800. And then I'll jump to my top view and just make sure that it's kind of positioned here. All right. We just want to make sure everything in this environment is encapsulated in the volume. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So I'll set this to perspective. And then I will jump to like a left view and just make sure that these green lines here fully encompasses that. There we go. So what does a Lightmass importance volume does? It's basically in the name. It tells Unreal Engine and Lightmass, which is the light baking tool, what's the most important in the level, right? Because Unreal's complaining and just saying, hey man, your level is huge and I don't know where to focus my efforts, so we're just gonna just spread photons everywhere. But with this, if we know that this is primarily what we're gonna be rendering, this is primarily where a character is gonna be walking around, or this is where our camera animation is gonna be happening, this is where you want your Lightmass settings to keep, okay? And we're gonna get into more detailed settings when it comes to light baking, but that is one of the main things that's gonna help immediately improve our bake quality, okay? So with that, I will go ahead and do another build and just hit build and let the swarm agent go. Now again, you can kind of see it processing, and what's nice about this is, you know, you could have a single powerful workstation, or like if you I mean, maybe even at like LTU, right? They have labs full of a bunch of computers sitting there. You can essentially turn each one of those machines into an agent, right? And use those to bake highly complex levels. Even at the highest settings on this machine, I'm still looking at about, you know, it was probably about 15 to 20 minutes to bake. I've done levels and projects where it'll bake for 12 to 24 hours, like weekend, let it run over the weekend type thing, right? And when you get to that point or things get so complex, that's where the swarm agent comes in. We can literally divvy it up and have machines, multiple machines helping and process that. There we go. So now we're getting a little bit better. It's still a little bit noisy here, but that's mainly because of the preview quality. And we are getting a lot nice, cleaner, less noise on the interior. All right. So definitely having the Lightmap importance volume is going to give us that extra detail, even without, you know, having to increase the settings like crazy. Okay, so we created 3 point lights, one in the center, one in the corner, and then one in the hallway. Now, what I want to do is create one for these recessed, or create a set for these recessed lights here. So what I want to do is now we have light here. We can either type in light or go to our lights panel and grab spotlight. I'll grab spotlight and drag that and place that here. And I'll just kind of position that. And we want to get this basically right around where this recessed light is. So you can see if I zoom up, you want to be careful because that source there will be occluded by the geometry if you push it up too high. So if you position this and you're like, hey, I don't see the lights, that's because the geometry is blocking it. It's opaque. Okay. So if I bring this down like so, there we go. All right. Now for these lights here, the settings that I want to use are to kind of is consistent with the point lights. So I want to expand the settings here, go to intensity units and use lumens. And these ones, I would say, what types of lights. I don't want these to be so blinding bright, right? Because this is directly over somebody. So maybe somebody's sitting here and you want these just to be nice, soft, warm lights that somebody could maybe use for reading or something like that. So I want these maybe 5 lumens instead of 20. I'm going to bring that down quite a bit, right? Now, the attenuation radius is a little bit different because this is more, it's conical, right? So it's a cone shape here. So unlike the point light, which is spherical, so it's pointing out in 360 degrees in every direction, the spotlight is kind of funneling it and using more of a cone shape, right? Like you would find on, a typical photo studio, all right? Now, you have the attenuation radius here that you can change. So this is basically how far, if I bring that in, you can see I can have it be, pretty short and even kind of stop before it goes down. But I'll leave this at 500 because basically the geometry is going to just catch the light and be done with it. You can certainly change the angle if you want this to be a little bit more focused, a little bit wider. Source radius, same thing, kind of the point. You can increase the size there. And the source lengths. I'm not going to really mess with the source radius or length here, but I will enable temperature. And if we were using 4500 here, I'd want to use something similar on these spotlights. I can do 4500. All right. So that's roughly the settings. Now, honestly, if you wanted to keep these as is, that's fine. Or we can use something called IES profiles. Okay. Now, IES profiles are nice because if you go here and, IES, and just type in IES profiles, I don't even know what it stands for, to be honest, but I just know that they are light profiles that are used so you don't have to calculate refraction and through glass, right? Because basically what this means is in the real world, you get these nice unique shapes because of how it refracts the glass. Well, they basically can put that in all that information into a texture and into this profile and just load that. So it becomes basically almost like a cookie cutout. All right. So with that, we can go to this light profile or this spotlight, and I'm going to just go ahead and move this to my interior group. So I'll left click, hold, and scroll up. We'll do spotlight. Then under here, I can hit the drop down and it already knows that I want a IES file type. So Unreal Engine shows me all the IES file types in here. And there's some simple ones, but really I want to use this complex IES that came with this the fundamentals lighting files. Okay, so I'll grab this. Boom, look at that. So now we get this nice unique looking shape, and that's all being calculated through this IES. All right. Now it's also getting some intensity that's affecting our original intensity. And if you wanted to decrease that, you can, or have it less intense, you certainly can. I'll leave it at 5 for now, and then we'll see how it bakes out. Okay, so with that, if I like everything here, I want to make sure I have this, and then I duplicate it once I'm happy with it. So I hit Control W to duplicate, and we will zoom in on that and just kind of roughly center it in position. Control W, and I think something like this. Maybe they're a little bit forward, which is okay, so I'll move them back. There we go. Okay, so I like where that's at. You know, if you wanted a little bit more overlap, you can, but honestly, it's gonna fill kind of this dark area with some bounce lighting. So we can leave this as is. Okay, now you may be looking at this and saying, hey, things are still looking a little bit off, right? Why? It's because we're using this here, this box reflection capture for the interior reflections. Okay, so remember, it's not only our box reflections that's giving us reflections on reflective objects, but look at this, right? It's basically also impacting kind of almost the ambient color on our models. Okay, so we want to go back in here and start setting up reflections. So I won't bake lighting until I set up some reflection captures. Okay, so what I'll do now is grab reflections, sphere reflection captures. So I'm going to just use sphere reflection captures except for the hallway, and I'll go ahead and kind of put one here in the corner. All right, so we're going to have one that's basically going to be in this darker corner here with just this one light kind of illuminating things, like so. So look at that right off the bat, right? Excuse me. So take a look at that, right? So toggling that on and off, you can already, this is kind of what I mean by that ambient lighting coming in. So instead of just being the blue exterior, now we're getting the warm interior. And what I do want to do is take a look at this influence radius is massive. So I want to bring that down a little bit to focus on primarily the interior. So I'll set it to maybe like 500. So that way it doesn't kind of bleed outwards. So that's looking pretty good. All right, and we can go ahead now and take this, Control W, move this. Now I kind of want one right outside this area here. And reflections aren't free. Just keep that in mind. For every set of reflections, remember it's using 1024, but you can use them, use them throughout the level. Just know if you run into any texture streaming issues or texture limitations, you may have to dial back the amount of probes. But again, I don't think we're not going too crazy here, so we'll just kind of use one for this area here. And I'll go ahead and duplicate it again. And this time I want to add one basically right in front of the door here. So something like this. Maybe move that in a little bit more, because now it's starting to affect the interior. So, or sorry, the outside of that. So we may want to tighten that one up a little bit so it doesn't affect it too much. So you get something like that. But we want to make sure that we grab the reflections and intensities from the outside and bring them inward. So now you see you get these nice reflections from the exterior, you go inside, and Unreal does a fantastic job blending reflection probes with each other. Okay. And if maybe there's one more, maybe you duplicate this and add this maybe right around the main sitting area, right in front of the TV. We get that. Okay. Now, there's nothing, it all depends, by the way. Like, let's say, well, I want to use a few box reflections. That's fine. You can use box reflections too. Like, we'll actually use it for this hallway. So we grab box reflection and drop this inside the hallway. Now what I want to do is jump to my top view and just kind of roughly position this here. And we can see, oh, remember, right click. Something like here. And we can bring in the X to kind of tighten that a bit. Maybe like 500, maybe 200 will be fine. Because remember, it's actually this shape right here, not this part. That's the ceiling. Okay, so we get something like this, and I can, that should be it, as long as it gets to that part here, and maybe a little bit of a blend right up until the door. Then I can take a look at it from the right side and just move it up in the Z here. All right, so maybe more in the center. It doesn't need to be where the lamp is. And then we can bring that depth down a bit, 800. Should be fine. Yeah, it's just gonna be blending right once it gets out that door, and we'll see how that bakes out. Okay, so now we got this reflection that's specifically for the hallway, which is more of the cooler interior, or the cooler look and feel. All right, so then now what we can do is just a quick, I won't build full lighting yet, but I will do a build reflection captures, moving and readjusting some things. And now it's taking a little bit longer because we've added quite a few maps, right? And so now we're getting this nice transition, this blue transition into this warm transition here. And reflection probes are doing a really good job baking that. Now our interior is starting to look a lot more kind of settled in place. Now that we, you know, we have our directional light bringing light in, our skylight bringing ambient light in. We have our interior lights and our interior reflections. Okay, so things are looking good there. Now there's one more reflection we've used on the pool on the outside. You can see here, this is using just a spherical map and it looks okay. You'll notice this sometimes in games when you're walking around and you get to a mirror or glass window that's really reflective and it just looks a little bit pixelated, right? Developers didn't want to spend time or resources putting, you know, either there's tricks to do it. You can maybe set another camera that's rendering the opposite direction, but then you have two cameras essentially rendering the scene twice, or two cameras rendering the scene. So it's rendering twice. But we can use planar reflections. So if I grab the planar reflection here, drag this in, put it right about where this window is, we can now use planar reflections to get a nicer looking mirror glass window. So what I can do is I'm going to just type in these properties that I already know the size of these small windows. I want 0.015, 0.01, and 1. Okay, then I want to rotate 90 degrees like so. There we go. Then it's looking a little bit weird, but we need to make sure to adjust our distance from the plane. I'm going to go ahead and lower that, the blending, and then the distance from the plane, which is 50. That kind of brings it in a little bit more. All right. Then what we can do is you can move that back up and kind of position that and then turn off the show preview. And then there you go. That looks much better. And then you can kind of push and pull. You'd want to make sure that the gizmo is basically right on top of it here. So look at that. It's reflecting the interior quite nicely. Now, remember before, disable capture every frame because we don't want it to update every frame. The other thing is, like, if this is a big deal in your game or a big deal in your environment, you can increase this detail because it's actually, if you, we have this one here under screen percentage here. Let's see. Oh, I have to expand the advanced settings. Sorry. So the screen percentage here is set to 50. If I set this to 100, look how much clearer and crisper that looks. Now, we're telling it basically screen percentage means, you know, use 100% of this screen, you know. So imagine, I guess what I'm trying to say is like if I was maybe about here, this is about 50%. And then if I zoom in, this is about 100% of the screen being used, given, you know, the different aspect ratios. It's just telling it to give it more importance, okay? So with that, I'll go ahead and hit Control W and move that over to this side here. So now, look at that. We get this nice reflection kind of coming in, and it's looking good. And we can even see our color calibrator on the outside. I mean, that's pretty cool. Then you can grab this, maybe the second one, Control W, and we have another mirror object right about here. There we go. So that's coming out pretty nicely. And I want to use the values of 0.02, 0.03, and 1's fine. And everything else is roughly about the same. And I just need to align this to there. And there we go. You're starting to look what's behind the camera. And you can adjust and position it, you know, how you see fit. But this should be about what we need. Okay, so we have all of this set up here. Let's see, so we got, we set up our lights, set up our reflections, and we set up some planar reflections. And that's the gist of the core lighting of the interior. Now, keep in mind, we don't have any bloom or anything, so things aren't going to glow. And we can maybe talk about that once we get into the post-processing side of things. All right, so what we want to do is go ahead and bake the interior again. Now that we kind of have all of our lights, reflections, and everything set up. So I will go to build and just do a straight build. And we can let this run. And there we go. So like I said, you know, over here we're getting some good bounce lighting, and this will fill up even more once we get into more advanced Lightmass settings. But things are interior starting to fill in pretty good. We're getting this nice warm look. And if you wanted to push it even further, if you want to push it even further, you can. So maybe we're like, you know, I want a little bit more warmth coming in here. Instead of 45, you know, you set it to like 4250. And then of course, once you do that on a static light, that means, hey, you got to rebake it. You touch anything, you touch any setting, you need to rebake it, which is fine. We can set this maybe to 4,000 to 4,000. Nice warmer light. And then here's the nice thing about stationary lights. Stationary is like, hey, I'm fine. You know, actually that's 400, but you can change this and you don't have to rebuild, right? So same thing on these 3 stationary lights here. Now, one thing to keep in mind when it comes to stationary lights is, watch this. Because we're using what's called deferred rendering, Unreal Engine has a certain limitation to how many real-time or stationary lights you can use at any given time. So if I'm like, oh man, why the heck would I ever use static, right? Go ahead and grab one more a spotlight, and look what Unreal says. Unreal's like, nope, sorry, we cannot let you do that. Because of the way deferred rendering works, maybe a little bit of an advanced topic, but there's deferred rendering and then forward rendering. And deferred rendering kind of uses like a total screen space, screen buffer way of rendering, when forward is more on a per object basis. So it's how many lights can affect a single object. They both have their benefits. Deferred allows you to use way more advanced post-processing, screen space ambient occlusion, temporal anti-aliasing, screen space reflections, all that stuff. Forward is more for VR because you can use what's called MSA, which is multi-sample anti-aliasing, and is a little bit cheaper, assuming you're using less lights. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Just a caveat: you're only limited to 4 stationary lights total per object, right? So, you know, I have to make sure. Let me see if it'll let me kind of come out here. No, it's basically saying, in the entire scene, it won't let me do that. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're using stationary lights, that there's a certain limitation, which is why, again, I had to use a combination of point, which is baked. Let's say you want this one to be your stationary light in the center and have it interacting with characters walking by. You can, and this be baked, right? So it all depends on your scene and your use. Okay, so that about covers lighting the interior here. Now, as far as setting up some lights, what we can do is I can do one more thing before the module ends, which is I can show you kind of one of the next Lightmass things is using what's called a Lightmass portal. So if you go in here and you type in Lightmass again, you'll see that there's Lightmass portal. And what I can do is I can grab this, left click drag, and I can drag this and put this right here. Okay, now what I want to do for this portal is essentially make it the size of this window. I'm going to actually select my color calibrator, and what is actually would be better practice is as we're lighting, hit Control W, duplicate the color calibrator, and bring this inside your environment. And make this a little bit smaller. There we go. So now, remember, the whole point of the color calibrator is it gives us a nice reference. That if we can make this object look good in the scene, then anything else that we drop in here is going to look just as good. All right, so our colors are showing up, right? And things to keep in mind as well is your blacks, show up dark, and your whites show up really light. Here, maybe our whites here are a little bit dark, so we can, bring some more light into the scene. But the entire interior is in shadow, right? So we can say, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and select these lights and maybe bump these up a little bit more. So 15 lumens, okay? So here in the corner, I'll set this up a little bit more, 15 lumens. That's gonna brighten that up. And we can leave kind of like these over here as is. So now we're just kind of making creative adjustments, right? And I can take this now, and I would say, you know what, I'm going to adjust this outer code angle to be a little bit wider to cover more area. So instead of 40, I'll set this to 45. We're going to get a nicer little overlap here on our lights. Okay. Now, don't worry. Like, if you see stuff like this, you're like, Mar, that kind of looks like crap. Don't worry. Stuff like this goes away because our shadows become softer. Okay. Also, remember what I said about this on our directional light, right? Let me collapse this. If we take a look at our directional light for main, is we have this setting that's really important, which is use area shadows for stationary lights. So area lights or area shadows are expensive and they take a while to calculate. And you won't get the fruit of that labor until you start to increase your Lightmass settings. Okay, so what I was saying here about this portal is if you select the portal and set it to about the size of this window. 10 is fine. And then I'm going to set this to about maybe 250. Yeah, something like this. And that's looking good. So, and I can maybe make the Z 125. And I want this to be kind of right here, right out, like right into the window, kind of pushing in. Unreal Engine sees transparent materials as not casting shadows, so they'll just make their way right past these glass windows and into the interior. Now, what's the point of a Lightmass portal? A Lightmass portal is like you're directing a skylight. So what you're doing is it's going to sample the area outside of this window, color, temperature, intensity, and then push that and allow the photons to focus in through this window. Okay, so if I had more windows here, like maybe if I had one in this hallway, I'd add one there. If I had another one on the other side, I'd add another portal. Basically, I want to add portals wherever you have windows, okay? And another thing to keep in mind is it also depends on the scale of your scene. For ArcViz, it works great, or kind of confined interior spaces, but it's not going to work well for large, expansive environments, right? Because remember, you're telling Unreal Engine using the Lightmass importance volume plus the Lightmass portal, kind of where to focus its efforts, where to focus the photons and radiosity and light bouncing. So what we can do here in the corner is to add another set of reflections. So I added another reflection here, spherical capture with 500 radius. And then I can grab this point light that I created, and then I can now kind of have it roughly be the size of this object here. And what you can do is increase the source length here. If I actually go ahead, maybe set that to 50, take a look at what happens. Right now, we have to make sure to also give this a source radius. And look at that. This turns into a capsule, right? So what I can do now is rotate it 90 degrees. A capsule or light bar or whatever, or cylindrical light. So we can drag this and look, it works perfectly for what we're trying to do here. So I can drop this underneath here. And increase this radius, or this source length to be about 200. And I can set the source radius to be a little bit tighter. So something like this. And now look at that. You get this nice looking kind of recess, nice lighting that's coming in the corner here. Okay. So I think that all works here. Maybe if you can bring that down a little bit to about 10 lumens. And we'll keep everything else the same. So I'll be using these settings to bake. Now remember, this is all just being lit using an EV value of -2. So if I set this to 0, you can kind of see, again, things are looking pretty good. And it's just being illuminated by light. So I know my post-processing is going to want to just lower the EV value so we pick up more light on the interior. So with that, I'll go ahead and do another bake. Okay, there we go. Sunreal's finishing up. Oops. And there we are. So take a look at how that bakes out really nicely and adds a nice good mood here in this corner from this light. And it's only going to get better as we increase the lighting resolution. Don't worry about this pixelation and whatnot. Again, all of that's going to be adjusted. And then if you move lights, don't be confused by like now there's double lights. This is the old baked light and this is the new lighting for the baking, right? So I'll just undo that, kind of put it back where it needs to be. With that, let's go ahead and do one last build and we will let that run. And remember, we're still just using preview. And there we go. So it may have been a little bit subtle, but we're getting a lot more cool blending in from the outside, blending in with this warm interior, which is exactly what we wanted. Right, so that's coming in really nicely, and will only get better as we increase the build settings. So for right here, I will go ahead and save this. Actually, maybe run a save all, just to be safe. You'll see that there's stars here, or asterisks, that let you know things have changed. And if you're following along, this is essentially where we end the lighting interiors module. So we started with setting up initial lighting, lighting the exterior, and then now we just finished lighting the interior. And then now for the next module, we're going to cover how to refine and improve our light baking, without setting crazy settings. And then we're going to add some post-processing. And then if time allows, I'll probably spend a little bit of time looking over some other sample files, so we can kind of take a look and dissecting different lighting approaches in Unreal Engine. So were there any questions so far?
This is good, Anwar. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Great. So let me see. I'll check the chat. Okay. Yeah, everything seems to be great in there. Thank you, Haley and Mars, obviously, for answering people's questions as we go. So let's do workshop time. I time it just in case there's some questions as I'm demoing. So we're making good time. We're making actually perfect timing. So right at 2 o'clock or 2 o'clock is workshop time. So like everyone to attempt to light the interiors. Remember on your end, you can crack open, you're like, oh man, what did he do for the reflection probes, or what did he do for the planar reflections? One, you can ask me, of course, or ask us in the chat. Or two, you can see what I did here in these files. So you can say, oh yeah, let me crack that open. Let me go to his settings. Oh yeah, he disabled here. So you have that as a reference. So I'll go back to my lighting start demo. And here's where we're at. Cool. So let's workshop time. Ask us any questions in the chat, or ask me any questions here. And the next part is we will take a look at some from 2 to 2:30 is workshop time, and then 2:30 we're gonna do light baking, more advanced light baking stuff, and post-processing. All right, that concludes the recording for this specific module. Be sure to check out the rest of the modules down below in the description. And if you found this helpful, please let me know down below. And definitely plan to put out more Unreal Engine and Unity and real-time 3D content here in the near future. So thanks and take care, everyone.